is some artwork that I did not make. Oh, thank you, Paul. Yeah. This is my son. They actually made this a few weeks ago in their class that they just ran to. And they were covering what we're covering today. That's Jesus walking on water. So can't you tell the waves? My favorite part of this is they're actually the verse that they reference up here. And it says, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And walking on water is one of Jesus' most famous or well-known things that he's done, right? People with very little biblical knowledge knows that Jesus can cross any body of water just by walking on it. But don't get me wrong, that is a skill, I guess, a power that I wish I could possess, right? Pool parties would be easy. Hikings would be easy. Crossing streams, you don't get wet, right? Go in the lake, you can just walk out there and fish. But that's not my favorite part of him walking on the water. My favorite part is that phrase, "Don't be afraid." We're going to get to that in a second, because first you need to know something about me. And that something is that I hate change. I really do. I mean, from day one, I've hated it. And when I say day one, I mean day one. My poor mother was in labor with me for 48 hours in the hospital. Sorry, moms out there. But to be fair, this is a massive change that we go through when we're babies, right? You have to start breathing on your own, right? That's a change. You have to start eating through your mouth. What is that? And there was these cold breezes that all of a sudden come up, right? We were nice and warm in there. But I wanted to stay put, right? That's a massive change. You can ask anyone in my family. You can ask my wife. You can probably even ask my kids. I hate change. It throws me off. When I was a kid, and you have a plan set in your head, right? You wake up in the morning, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and then something unexpected comes in, I would get upset. Sometimes I would get really upset. And even as an adult, I do the same things. I'm looking at my wife right now. When something throws off my routine, I become sour. I get moody. And it's funny because as an adult, I'm actually super aware of it. I'm aware that I do this. I've been through a bazillion different scenarios where change has affected my life, and I've come through on the other side unscathed. But I still have the initial reaction of fear, the initial reaction of anger, and confusion. But what really gets me about me doing this is I'm starting to see my kids do it. That's hard. I see them reacting the same way when my wife and I throw a change, or school throws a change, or something throws a change. And here's the other sad part. I find myself getting frustrated with them because they're doing this, right? I have this amazing wisdom. I'm like, guys, your reaction is not necessary right now. Yeah, it's funny. But it's also, it hits you, right? Parenting comes really quick when you're instructing your kids about some rules to not do, and then you don't follow them yourself, right? It hurts. Ultimately, my fear of change is rooted in fear of the unknown. And I'm not alone, because a recent poll shows that 1/3 of Americans suffer with the same thing, change. For me, doing something out of the norm, doing something by myself that I have no experience in, it's intimidating. And the furthest thing from my mind is that the potential growth and opportunity it provides for me. For changees like me, that's not the official term, so don't hold me to that. Change triggers a deep-rooted fear within us due to our innate tendency to seek stability and familiarity. Resisting change, for me, is a survival mechanism. I want control over my everyday, and I want my everyday to be like every other day, right? No change, nothing at all. But that's not life. Life has changes. But regardless of the fear, any type of fear, we all experience the crippling effect it can have on our lives. We don't think clearly. We make irrational decisions, and doubt becomes a major voice in our lives. If only there was a book available to us that talks about and tells us what to do with our fear. Some combination of the words like don't be afraid, fear not, appear in Scripture 365 times. Now, if you just do a quick Google search, that's one verse for every day for a full year. I didn't go in and count, so don't hold that exact number to me, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Because we all should turn to it when we're feeling overwhelmed and fear, myself included. I mean, we're so fortunate to have it right in our pocket, right? We have an app, but it's not always the first place we turn. I know it isn't for me, and I don't like that about myself. But this is why I'm so fascinated with the do not be afraid that we have in Mark 6. The disciples, they didn't have that Bible app available to them, right? But what they did have, they had the walking word of God, and they were still afraid. We're going to see that today. They saw firsthand demonstrations of power and authority that Jesus did, and they still fell to the grips of fear, right? And that's comforting to me, that the disciples can fall into uncertainty, and I can too, even though I have the answer right in front of me. I did some research on that Bible app that we all probably have, and for the third year in a row, the most searched for verse on the Bible app is Isaiah 41:10. And that's, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." I want you guys to hold on to that. Hold on to that verse for today, because that's a launching point for what we're going to talk about in Mark 6 today. Last week, we left off with the feeding of the 5,000, or 10,000-ish, if everyone was counted. And then Mark goes from there, and he immediately jumps into the next thing. That's what Mark does. He goes from one topic to another. He goes quick. And so here's how he starts it. Mark 6:45. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethesda, while he dismissed the crowd. Nothing much here, right? Seems pretty normal. This is the normal things they did. They did an event over here. They would cross the ocean or the sea on the boat and just to continue their mission. But there is something different here because Jesus made his disciples go into the boat before him. He made them go without him. And this was certainly a change for all of them, right? Crossing the boat without him. And would have been concerning. After all, they could have helped dismiss the crowd, right? They could have helped clean up, helped get people to where they wanted to go. But no, they were pushing out to sea without their teacher. The Gospel of John actually kind of paints the picture of what was actually happening after the feeding of the 5,000. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king. So the crowd was a little worked up, right? Taking someone by force to make him king. Can't you picture the anxiety level in the disciples ramping up? After this great miracle of a feeding of a bunch of people with very little food, and they wanted to take him by force to make him king. Definitely a little chaotic, if you ask me. And then here's Jesus making them leave the situation, and they don't know what's going to happen to them. They're sailing out to sea. And the idea of making him king, that's not going to go over well. Right? Especially with the trouble they've gotten into previously. You can see that in Mark. And certainly the Pharisees in the region wouldn't take that so lightly to making Jesus king. But thankfully, if anyone can handle a crowd like this, it's Jesus. and he manages by himself to dismiss the crowd. And we continue in Mark. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out to sea, and he was alone on the land. So instead of dismissing the crowd, he doesn't just hop in a boat, paddle up to catch up with his friends. He went up to the mountain to have solitude time with God. Isn't it amazing how, in this story and many others, Jesus doesn't panic? There is no panic or fear in any situation that he is in. The disciples probably would have made things worse if they were kept around while this crowd was being dismissed. Jesus doesn't panic. Instead, he lets more time pass so he can go talk to the Father. This is outside of normal thinking. At least it is for me. We don't leave people hanging like that. We've all been in situations where we're in the middle of a project or something at work. Someone comes like, hey, I need you. Like, oh, let me finish this and I'll be right there. Because we don't want people waiting on us because that can cause an issue. Or at least in our heads, we think it can cause an issue. So can you imagine taking the Jesus approach to this? Let me finish this, then I'm going to go spend a few hours with God, and then I'll come see what you need. That wouldn't go over so well. Jesus, never in a panic, and he doesn't want us to be either. And Paul references this in Philippians. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Jesus routinely demonstrates the act of pulling away to isolation after his miracles and teachings. And I wonder if the disciples were knowing that this was going to happen. They were being pushed out to sea without their teacher. He's dismissing a crowd. They have no idea when they're going to see him again because they're probably thinking, he's just going to go spend time with God. That's what he does. He goes to isolation. When are we going to see him? But eventually, Jesus does fix his gaze back on his friends. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. I can't help at this point in the story to put myself, my fear of change self, into the shoes of the disciples, or sandals. First, their teacher sent them away during a chaotic situation, essentially communicating to them that they're not needed. That's different. That's change. How do you guys feel when you're not needed, when you feel like you could help the situation? Now they're on a boat all by themselves with no refuge or place to pull over. They're at the mercy of the waves. And now another windstorm is blowing against them. As a person who doesn't like change, this is too much change. And uncertainty and stress levels, they've got to be running high on the boat with the disciples. Because it wasn't that long ago, we heard about the first storm that they were in, and Jesus calmed that. And that has to be running through their heads. But Jesus isn't there. They panicked back in the first opportunity too, because Jesus was asleep. And they thought they were going to die. And sleep isn't something that these guys are doing right now. Because the fourth watch means it's about 3 a.m. in the morning. It's a long time from being pushed off the shore from the feeding to now. So they had all day with a large crowd. That's exhausting. Then feeding a large crowd. That can be exhausting. Now they're caught in rough seas in the middle of the night, and they haven't slept. Stress and fear are welling up in those situations. And that's evident in the reaction they had. Because when they saw Jesus walking on the water, it continues here. He meant to pass them by, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost, and they cried out. For they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid. That first line up there, it threw me off when I first read it. He meant to pass them by. That doesn't sound like Jesus, right? After all these guys have been through, he was just going to walk by them. For this, it shows how painfully slow these guys were actually moving, that someone can walk faster than your boat, right? Second, this isn't inconspicuous at all. Of course they're going to see him, this guy walking on the water out to sea. You're going to see someone. Jesus could have met them on the other side, and their minds would have been blown still, right? They would have been astounded, as we get to at the end of the verse, still. But he chose this hour and this location to show up. But why? Why would he do this? And it's so they could see his glory, so they could see him as God, to see his divinity. That is the reason this whole thing is taking place. Because a better or more accurate translation of the word meant in Greek is wanted to. Jesus wanted to pass them by. There is a bigger story Jesus is trying to get across to his disciples. And Jesus uses this moment to fulfill Old Testament. Because this is exactly what God did for both Moses and Elijah at Mount Sinai. He passed by them so they could see his glory. So check this out. This is Exodus. I will make all my goodness pass before you, and you will proclaim before you my name, the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I show mercy. And then 1 Kings. Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountain and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. It's important. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in a fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. What God did for Moses and Elijah, Jesus was doing for the disciples. There's more to the story than the perspective of the disciples, what we're reading. From their perspective, it only appears that he intended to pass them by. And I don't blame them. This is a very normal reaction. I wish I could say that I wouldn't react this way, but I know I would. And here's why. Because of traffic. My reaction to traffic. And I'm hoping I'm not alone in this. I constantly overreact to traffic, especially when it's an unnecessary slowdown, right? There's no one pulled over. There's no accident. It is just slow for no reason. I overreact because why? I'm going to be late. My wife is laughing right now. I'm going to be late. Wherever I'm going to be late. There is fun happening without me. Everything is taking place. The whole evening, the whole scenario is taking place without me. I'm missing it, right? I believe the kids call that FOMO, right? The fear of missing out certainly causes me to react irrationally. But this is what attracts me so much to Jesus. Because he's not passing by them or leaving them behind. He's showing them exactly who he is and where their focus should be. Because in the middle of their anguish, while they're crying out, he quiets their fearful hearts. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. I want to focus on "it is I." "It is I" is the cornerstone to this scene. Most translations obscure this phrase. It can mean "it is I," but most commonly found in Scripture, it is more accurately used, "I am." God's divine name, I am. Once again, this is exactly what God did for Moses. The whole story is a revelation of the deity of Jesus. Jesus is not saying to them, don't be afraid because you know me. I'm not a ghost. Guys, it's me. He's saying, do not fear because I am God. And that should have been clear at the feeding of the 5,000. But their hearts were unable to piece it together of who Jesus truly is. It was a demonstration of the same type of authority that can walk on water. That verse in Isaiah, the most searched verse, this is just before that. Who has performed and done this? Calling the generations from the beginning, I, the Lord, the first, and with the last, I am he. I have done this. Jesus routinely calls back to the Old Testament over and over just to signal to his followers that I am him. Jesus uses this same phrase many times throughout the gospel. Things like, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Before Abraham was, I am. And I am the bread of life. So don't be anxious. Don't have fear, but rather trust because I am. And this should be even more clear when he gets in the boat and the wind stops, just like it did before. And this caused the disciples to be astounded. But it's important to not take that astonishment as sudden faith. Astonishment doesn't mean faith, because Mark ends it with their hearts were hardened. And again, this echoes an Old Testament back in Job, where Job refers to God himself walking on water. And then 3 verses later, it says, behold, he passes by me, and I see him not. He moves on, but I do not perceive him. The disciples missed everything that went on, right? From the feeding of the 5,000 to the walking on the water. They missed it. And we're going to see that they're going to continue to miss it. And all of us are going to continue to miss and get lost in fear. But that's why we have grace-filled God that continues to show us exactly who he is and what he's up to. Fear can blind us from a transformation that can only be found in God. Dallas Willard writes about this. My intention is to help you realize that fear and worry are worthless, indeed vain emotions. If you are frightened or afraid, there is no use feeling guilty about it. What you need to do is fix your mind on God and ask him to fill your mind with himself. And as your mind is transformed, your whole personality will be transformed, including your body and your feelings. The transformation of self away from a life of fear and insufficiency take place as we fix our minds upon God as he truly is. So I hate change. And it is pretty safe to say a major change in my life is this. All of this, all of you, this building, Kingship is a massive change in my life. And it's hard to believe that a little over 4 years ago, things were starting to ramp up, starting to progress that, wow, we're actually going to do this. I'm actually part of this church thing that's moving on. Julie, my wife, was not on board as much as I was. I was definitely out of my comfort zone, but she was further from her comfort zone and not on board at all. And this wasn't the only change happening in our life, because as talks were ramping up and I was off meeting with people, Julie had just given birth to our youngest son. A lot of change, and newborns are fun to navigate. I remember this weekend so vividly because Julie and I were having a conversation about kingship. And it wasn't much of a conversation. It was more of an argument. or a disagreement, if you want to be polite about it. We were not seeing eye to eye. We were both overwhelmed. We never got to finish the conversation because Julie's mom was in town, and we were going to go estate shopping and antique store shopping. So we went off. And that is fun time. I'm not just saying that because my mother-in-law is going to be watching this later. I highly recommend it. But we went off, and I remember the whole trip. It was just heavy. I was heavy. My wife and I were not communicating. I just felt agony. It was real, just sorrow. So I was like, God, what am I doing? Should I be pursuing this? My wife obviously does not want to be pursuing this right now. Am I a fool? I'm a fool. I'm arguing with my wife about starting a church. For me, there's been so many signs. All these things were happening, and I was like, yeah, I should do this. But I was just hurting. I was sitting in the back seat by myself, praying internally. And I was just, God, should I pursue this? Should I be going down this path? And I remember it vividly because we were driving down Cornelius Pass Road. We were actually passing McMinimans, the roadhouse. We're familiar with the roadhouse at Kingship. And I remember there was this car. It was slowly passing us. I'm praying, and the car was just coming up, and I could see in the rearview mirror there was a little cross. And when you're praying and you see a cross, your attention goes to that. You're just kind of looking. And the car is just slowly passing. Driver passes us. It's looking out the window, and then the back window starts to come in, and I can see that there's a sign taped on the window. And when it comes into view, it has 2 words on it. And the words are, "Why not?" I am praying about, God, should I do this? Should I pursue this? And then here comes the car slowly passing us with the words, "Why not?" I'm not joking. This really happened. I can't think of a whole lot of reasons why a car is driving with a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with the words "Why not?" taped to it. If you have an idea, let me know. But these 2 words changed things for me. They changed my perspective. They changed my focus. Because I'm standing here today. I'm up here. When we got home and we had a moment alone, I remember talking to Julie saying, "Did you happen to see a car with the words 'Why not?' written on it?" She said, "I did." And so we continued our conversation, only this time with a new perspective, together. And it changed things. I want to wrap things up today with a part of the story that's not in Mark. And I'm not surprised it's not in Mark because Peter is Mark's informant. And this story involves Peter. And that's the story of Peter getting out of the boat and walking with Jesus. Matthew 14. And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand, took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got back in the boat, the wind ceased. It certainly seems like Peter has great trust, right, to do this. But it also is a bit challenging. Jesus, command me to come out there if it's you. But he ultimately does, and he gets out of the boat, and he walks on water all the way to Jesus. But that quickly evaporates when he does what? when he takes his eyes off of Jesus and he starts focusing on all the things going around him, he starts to sink. But Peter has the wherewithal to do the right thing and call out to Jesus, "Save me," which is exactly what they did the last time they were in the storm, when they all thought they were dying. They said, "Save us, we're dying." And what does Jesus do? He immediately causes the storm to stop. He reaches out. He immediately is there. Did you also notice that Jesus asked Peter why he doubted before he and Peter re-entered the boat? After all, they got back in the boat together. The boat to carry all of them. This boat, it's not a little rowboat. All these guys, and fishing gear probably, it would have been a decent-sized boat. So you're talking a good to get out and back in. It's a big step. Joyce, Jesus didn't throw them in like a fish onto the boat. They got in the boat. Peter's focus was back on Jesus, and standing together, Jesus asks, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" He's almost hinting that the solution to Peter's problems is standing right in front of him. Peter had little faith, but a little faith was enough when Peter rested it on Jesus, when his focus was on Jesus. So I want to leave you with 6 words. And these 6 words I try to run to every time I feel that fear change swirl in me as a reminder. And these words were given to me after all that fateful day. This took place after. And it's focus on Jesus, not your limitations. After that faithful day, this was said to me, and it was a new perspective. A new perspective in fear was born for me, where my focus goes on Jesus and not the things swirling around me. So I ask you, where is your focus? When you're anxious, when you're fearful, when you're doubting, where is your focus? Are you willing to trust that Jesus is greater than your fears? Are you willing to trust that the little faith you have can take you further than you ever thought you could imagine? If you're not sure, then I have 2 words for you. Why not? Why not?